Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. Much is made about the growth of corporate sector in this country and the need for encouraging it to grow further. However, one of the less spoken and heard stories about the corporate growth is also the steep growth in its debts, which in recent times have assumed huge proportions. Such is the debt burden on these corporates that 23 of the top 50 companies by their debt levels have not been able to pay interest on their loans for 7 or more quarters. And we are talking only of interest, not the principal amount borrowed. There are also other facts like the debt level of top 10 Indian corporate groups, which includes the who's who in Indian business, have gone up by 15%. A report by Credit Suisse had come out with this alarming fact that the total debt of 3,600 large cap companies in India was over $400 billion and it was worsening. There is also a $172 billion short-term debt maturing by March end this year, which has to be paid by the country, a large part of it which has been borrowed from external sources by the Indian corporates. The effect of all this on the Indian banking system is also serious, with large banks like State Bank of India and Punjab National Bank having 4% of its asset as non-performing assets. We will look at this increasingly worrying state of corporate affairs in the country and discuss whether the debt burden is something we need to be alarmed about or are they manageable. To discuss this, I have with me CM Vasudev, former Finance Secretary in the Government of India, Mohan Guruswamy, Economist and Visiting Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Dr. Praveen, Professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the JNU, and Jyotirmoy Jain, Secretary General of CIMSME. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Vasudev, 3,600 large cap companies having debt burden of over $400 billion and that's going up by the day. Are these something which we need to be concerned about, or these are things which are within manageable limits?
No, I think you have to see the overall larger picture here, that when you got a little private sector led growth model, more and more of the savings in the economy are going to be intermediated through the financial sector. Unlike a socialist type of an economy where most of the savings are captured by the government through taxes and then the government decides where to deploy those savings. So that is in the nature of things, that a large amount of savings in our economy are now being intermediated through the financial sector. Now, if you take aside the willful type of defaulters in the corporate sector, that they have to be dealt with in a different manner. But a large amount of corporate debt which is being given to them through the financial sector, which is really intermediating between savers of society and the users of those savings.
Right.
You can't have a system where you got a financial sector which is healthy and the real sector is unhealthy, or the vice versa. So lot of the problems of the corporate sector, especially the debt and the borrowings from the financial intermediaries like banks and all, is also a reflection of the performance of the real sector. If the real sector is real sector means the real sector of the economy, manufacturing sector, the agriculture sector, service sector, this sector, that is the real sector, and this is the financial sector.
Okay.
So the financial sector, which is providing this debt to the corporates, cannot remain unaffected by the performance of the real sector. You can't have a situation where the real sector is unhealthy and the financial sector is healthy, or vice versa.
Performance of the real sector
means growth in the economy.
No, but is the performance of the real sector a problem of the management, or is it a larger issue, a policy matter, or what is it?
Now we are in a different type of a debate. Why is the real sector not doing well?
Right.
Why the growth rate has faltered? Why we have problems with the economy? There are different issues on that score which we can discuss. But on this limited point, to say that the debt of the corporate sector, to consider it in isolation without taking into account the performance of the real sector, I think may be giving an incomplete picture. Because as I said, take the willful defaulters apart. You have to deal with them in a legal manner and see that they are brought to book. But a large amount of corporate debt has been taken on the certain assumptions with regard to performance of the real sector, the growth story and inflation and various other things.
Okay.
And if the real sector is not doing well, the financial sector by definition will not be able to do well.
Mohan, Mohan, 80% of the companies, it says that
No, first I would like-
80% of loans with companies, I'm just giving you a lead here, 80% of loans of companies haven't been able to pay interest for 4 quarters in the last 2 years. What does it mean? Does it mean that, as Mr. Vasudev says, that there is a problem in the real sector that's being reflected in the performance?
No. If you look at the GDP growth, it's 4.8%.
Yes.
This is not bad by any standard. If you take the previous 50 years and take out the last 10 years, we never touched that rate. It's only in the last 10 years we've been doing this rate. So to say that the economy is not doing well is wrong. And 4.8 by world standards is very good.
And it was
It's
over 9% recently.
It's 5.2% more than Europe.
Right.
So it's quite good. Okay. So I don't think that is the issue. The issue is the way we have seen in the last 20 years particularly, after this liberalization which came, which was kind of unbridled liberalization, you've had large amounts of public money going to private sector.
Right.
Now, what these people have been doing is they've been on a borrowing cycle.
Absolutely.
They borrow money, they don't repay the old loan, they borrow more money. So today you come into a situation where out of the top 15 corporate houses in the country, 10 are not even able to service their debt.
Yes.
That means they have to borrow more money to service their debt.
Just to pay the interest.
To pay their interest.
Yes.
So what they're doing is this business of corporate restructure keeps taking place.
Yes.
Okay. That is, they come to government and say, look, I am 90,000 crores down, and I'm going to go under unless you give me more money.
Right.
So the bankers all meet, and everybody takes a little thing. Okay, let's give some more. So the books are dressed up. There are very few defaulters as such. The defaulter list this year is 40,000 crores.
The 2 companies which have been declared as non-performing assets.
No, there's a difference between...
There's
a difference between defaulter and an underperforming and a non-performing asset. Defaulter is the fellow who's can't pay,
yes,
period, and who's not deserving of any more debt.
Right.
Like Kingfisher Airlines.
Right. Or Deccan Chronicle Holdings also.
Whatever, Deccan Chronicle, Winsome Diamonds,
right.
All this, and there are huge amounts of money given to these people.
Right.
Winsome Diamonds, have you heard of them? Get 2,600 crores
right.
down.
So which means that there's no hope of recovery from them.
It's gone. You can proceed on them, you take them to shut down and closure, nothing's going to happen, you won't get anything back. You might get 5 paise to a rupee. That is the kind of settlement you get. Now you got the other fellows. You got fellows like Anil Ambani's Reliance Group, Vedanta, SR, Adani, JP Group, JSW, GMR, Lanco, Videocon, GVK Group, Terminal 2 yesterday.
Yes.
Their debts have gone up 24% over last year.
Right.
Okay.
Which is something amazing actually.
Which is quite amazing. I'll just take one company. I was just coming here, I was reading the papers, one company into whose balance sheets I was looking at when I was coming here. Because this was, T2 was inaugurated yesterday, so the feature in the on the business standard today. His debt from last year has gone up by 4,000 crores, from 18,560 crores to 23,215 crores. His sales has come down from 2,041 crores to 1,992 crores. Net profit is down. So there's no way this company can service his debt.
Right.
Now, what happens is in a situation like this,
one second. How much of it is because of the problems in the real sector, as Mr. Vasudev said?
No, number of passengers flying in and flying out is going up. His power sector is doing well. But what has happened is these guys borrow money. There's very little of their own capital they put. So they're huge overhang of borrowings. A good way for these people to sort these problems the books can be straightened out, is to convert a lot of the debt into equity. But that means that some of these people will lose control of the company. Yeah. Now that is become paramount interest. How there's something known as promoter group.
Right.
Promoter group is somebody who's got 4-5% and who's got cobbled together some friends of promoters and kind of thing, and they're holding on to companies. So if you capitalize these companies, your shareholding goes to the institutions.
And they lose control of it.
For instance, Tata
is
a very good example of a company which is widely dispersed in shareholding.
Right.
It's got LIC, it's got UTI, it's got the banks, everybody.
So you don't find those companies, Tata company, but there is one Tata company which is having a problem.
No, one Tata company, but as a group, even the big Reliance company, as a group, they are in good shape. They can service their debt, they can, continue to borrow more money, they're okay. The problem begins when you get out of, your growth becomes, you're hungry for growth, and you therefore keep borrowing more money, and then you are using that money to service last year's debt, and you got no more money to invest. That's when you come into a hole.
Okay, Praveen. So this is where does the problem lie here? The problem where does the government come into the picture? How have the policies in the last 20 years affected this kind of?
Exactly. You see, basically the problem, and this is a serious problem. Let's not kid ourselves.
This is an alarming problem.
Certainly. I mean, I sort of have been saying this for a while now that at least for the last couple of years, that we are sitting on a kind of a time bomb.
Right.
So the basic reason behind this is a kind of change in the overall business culture, regulatory atmosphere, etc., that we have seen in the last 20 odd years. We saw the extreme form of that in US and Europe, as we know. That whole sort of subprime lending, etc., were a product of that. In a sense, we are having something similar. As Mohan was pointing out, that sort of they keep taking debt,
borrowing money to repay.
Exactly. And
so if we as individuals do, we will be.
You will not get it in the first place. We will not get it first place. But then there's this the ease with which they can get it.
Yes.
And the ease with which they can get away.
Yes.
With not being sort of prudent about it in terms of management, etc., is something which is certainly a product of the overall policy atmosphere and policy environment. That's the first point I'd like to make. Second, of course, in a very temporary sense, the problem is also of the global economy.
Right.
In that sense, this depreciation of rupee, and in the last couple of years, the way things have happened, etc. So that's the sort of, and we have had such short-term issues at different points in time.
Right.
But the fundamental factor which explains this, for instance, between 2008 and 2013, for instance, over the 5-year period, I think from 3.5 trillion rupees, it's now 10.24 trillion.
Yes.
It's more than trebled and so on. Now, why should this happen? How do we kind of account for it? Likewise, you have already given figures for our external debt.
Yes.
We know that of the top 100, according to most analysts, there are about 40 which are considered to be in distress situation.
Chronic stress.
Exactly.
It's called chronic stress
and so on. And another 15 or so serious difficulty and so on. Now, clearly, if the problems were there, somebody should have sensed these problems early enough, and that is where the policy framework that you're talking about is something which is at the center of it. Somehow, sort of this overall laxity, the overall, sort of devil may care or whatever, that kind of attitude is something which is central to it.
Okay, Mr. Jain. So, Jain, what is your take on this? The corporates going on borrowing and expecting the government to rescue them whenever they get into this kind of a chronic stress. Is this the way it will be continued, or where does the problem lie? Or do you agree with Mr. Vasudev, who says that the real sector, the problems in the real sector are causing all this?
Yes, sir. The situation looks to be alarming, but it's not desperate. The fact that the last before 08 we had a continuously run of 9% plus growth. And after that, we had a
that encouraged the corporates to go on a borrowing.
They went into high leveraging, because they thought that this situation will continue without realizing that any economy cannot grow continuously. We wanted, there's no doubt about it. But when the economy heated up, we had problems of infrastructure, we had a problem of policy paralysis, we had a problem of environmental, etc. So all those things put together, they were responsible for slowdown in the project execution. And perhaps this was an escalating effect that took place in the last 3-4 years. Now, the banks have to make sure that these units don't go dry. So what they did, they restructured, they rehabilitated those units in the hope that the future is going to be a bright thing. But perhaps they failed miserably. So the only condition that I think that's more important is, until we have a growth going beyond 6 to 7%, I mean, things look to be very, very difficult. And more so, the government was responsible in diluting or relaxing the ECB norms. realizing that these loans have to be repaid back in foreign exchange.
Right.
We don't have a high current account.
$172 billion has to be paid by March. Yes.
So who will pay it? Unless you have a continuous flow of $90 billion capital inflows, the situation is going to be very, very difficult. So partly you can't blame the government, or you can't blame the industry, but it's a composite structure where everyone has
got
and
involved.
if you recently say that in the environmental ministry, large number of fines were pending.
Yes.
Who was responsible? See, someone has to be accountable for that. Taking that banks are responsible, I don't agree with you.
So the
it's a whole system.
The banks have no other option but to restructure
They
the
had to
loans
do
to
it.
get the
They had to
loans
do
for
it. They had to do it.
Okay. Yes, Mohan.
You know,
Quickly, before I go to Mr.
I went to a business school. I've been studying business practices for a very long time. Only in India, the word restructure means more debt. When you say you're restructuring a company anywhere in the world, you're hiving off divisions, you're changing management, you're doing all kinds of things. In India, the management stays the same, the businesses stay the same, only more debt comes in.
Yes.
So, you know, all these guys, there's no restructuring. This is fooling the public. What is happening is just throwing more money at it, saying that please survive. And why is this money thrown? Because there is a large interest involved, very powerful interest involved. There are people in government whose real job is to see that some of these groups, and many of these groups are very closely aligned to senior politicians. You know, you can take any of the top debtors.
Half of them, at least.
Yeah.
At least several of them are politicians who
Yeah.
are very much in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha.
So you know, restructure.
Yes.
We must get the meaning of this word right. Restructure to me means that capitalizing the loans, changing the management, altering the businesses. That doesn't happen.
Mr. Vasudev, you need to give us some more knowledge about how this happened and why this happened. As Mohan is pointing out, restructuring is something which any big corporate group or even medium corporate group with some access to the powers that be is able to manage this.
No, I don't think it can be anybody's case that there are no sort of ills in terms of what is called in the banking parlance of evergreening of assets.
Exactly.
That you got problems and you get more loans and all that. One can't sort of say that all those problems are not there. Evergreening takes place. But apart from corporate restructuring, there is always a financial restructuring also when there are assets in stress and corporates in distress. There are both, you have to have corporate restructuring and you have to have financial restructuring.
But what corporate restructuring doesn't take place.
Well, you have, if the instruments don't work,
the only corporate restructuring, the only major corporate restructuring we've heard recently was Satyam.
I know, but
apart from that, I don't think there has been any.
But if the systems and institutions you have set up like BIFR and all are not doing what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to do this type of restructuring. If they don't do, then what do you do? I agree with that. But at the same time,
sir, my question is this. What is the pressure on the government in such situations?
I don't know whether there is a government sort of pressure in that sense. Of course, that tells its own story, that as the numbers you were mentioning, that the non-performing assets in the public sector banks, SBI and PNB and all
1.76 lakh crores.
4.6 crores. 4.6 lakh crores. 5%.
No, only these two banks, 1.76 lakh crores.
So that may tell its own story, and the private sector banks, there the NPAs are below 0.5% or something. So that tells its own story that there is some sort of political suasion going on in providing corporates loans which are not financially fully viable, projects not properly appraised,
right.
And there is some connected lending, that type of thing happening in the public sector banks of the type that you're mentioning. But at the same time, I'm only saying that we should not forget the big picture. The big picture also is that the bank lending in India is just about 40 to 50% of the GDP, whereas the fast-growing economies in Asia, the Asian tigers, Southeast Asian countries, and ASEAN countries, it is 120%, 130%, 140%. As a percentage of GDP, the bank lending.
If the bank lending goes up, you think the situation will improve? Or we will see more and more banks,
more bank lending
having
means
NPAs.
Well, then you have no hope. Then you have no future. Then you have no future. If that is the type of scenario you are painting, then you have no future.
Right.
What I'm saying is that the economy has to grow, and if we have at some point of time to match what the faster growing developing economies are doing, then the share of bank lending as a percentage of GDP has to grow massively. Because that is the only way.
I'll come to you, Mohan.
Because the basic growth principles of economics you can't get away from. You must have savings, you must have investment, that will give you growth. So what is your channel of channelizing savings to productive investment?
So you don't see any, except for in exceptional cases where the mismanagement has taken place, or the corporates
you
and
have to
things like
fix
that.
problems
These
where
are
they
all
are.
problems of the
You have to
bank
fix
sector.
problems where they are, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay, yes,
you
Praveen.
cannot do that.
Listen, I mean, this is as Mr. Vasudevan is saying, it's a basic principle of economics that yes, you need money, lending, etc. is important, but we can't then think of it in a piecemeal manner.
Right.
Sort of, I can borrow money from you and fritter it away, and nothing happens to me. Now that is exactly what is happening in India.
Yes.
And it's been happening not for 1 or 2 years, but it's been happening now for decades. I mean, at least a couple of decades.
You
now,
need
how
to
do we
also
address that?
calculate what is the debt coverage ratio. The debt which has been incurred by corporates, how much of it is backed by asset creation. If the debt coverage ratio is
I
good,
agree.
assets,
One of the arguments of
the leakage of the money will arise if the debt coverage ratio is low. People are borrowing money and using it for purpose for what it is intended to be.
It's very evident, sir, by the fact that they are not able to service their debt for 8 quarters, 10 quarters, some of them not once also. Exactly. It clearly shows that they have not been able to manage the money.
Yeah. And the way the NPA has grown even in last 2 years, for instance, if you just look at those figures,
yes.
If you look at the attitudes of the likes of Mr. Vijay Mallya, for instance,
right.
And nothing happens.
Right.
So there is a systemic malaise.
Absolutely.
And I think it's extremely important to recognize that government seems to have washed its hands off, not entirely, but in large measure, and that is a serious problem that needs to be addressed.
Yes, Mohan.
Recently had this case of this man, P.K. Mittal.
Yes.
Who had celebrated his daughter's wedding in Barcelona, spending 500 crores, conservative estimate. He is in debt to banks, default, thousands of crores. He's keeping away from the country. But yet, he gets more money and he can do this kind of thing. The thing is that this money doesn't belong to the government either. It belongs to the depositors.
Yes.
There is a fiduciary relationship that people have with the banks have with the public. You have to give that money back on demand. Okay. Now you can't misuse that money. Now, what happens is this is a test of management. If the management borrows money and it can't pay back, can't service the debt, then there's something wrong with the management.
Right.
Okay. Now, this typical thing to do is to restructure, not throw more money. Okay. To dress up the books and saying this is an underperforming asset, this is temporary situation, global economy.
One second. What you're trying to say, and what Praveen also is trying to say, is that there is no punishment, or there is no, as far as the mismanagement is not punished.
I'm raising another question.
Yes.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister went and inaugurated T2.
Right.
2 defaulters were standing on either side of him, owing 20,000 crores overdue. They can't service it. What is the message? The Chief Minister of Maharashtra is sitting there. The finance institutions heads are there. What is the message the Prime Minister is sending to the banking institutions? He's basically saying that I bless them, give them more money.
Just one small footnote to what he's saying. Yes. Just the share of all these bad loans, etc., vis-a-vis the private sector and public sector.
Right.
I think Mr. Vasudevan has already mentioned that earlier. Much of it is being borne by your public sector banks.
Right. Absolutely. And this $172 billion which we are supposed to be repaying, the short-term debt which we are supposed to repay by March end. A large part of it is the corporate's external commercial borrowings.
Totally.
So my question is this: if they don't repay, if they are unable to repay by March, what happens?
No, they will have to pay.
If they are unable to repay, what happens?
Pay, then the banks will have to make.
See, the banks will have to make good for that.
The country is at stake. So you cannot have the sovereign rating coming down.
Yes.
So ultimately, the banks, the social responsibility of the banks, you cannot deny. After all, there could be certain hiccups. There's no doubt.
Where is the social?
All power plants, big plants, the private sector will not fund. They will never touch it. They have never touched it. ICICI Bank never touched it. Now someone has to do it. After all, when you're looking at a growth of 9%, who will do it? Private
So
will not
ultimately,
touch.
you're saying that ultimately the burden falls on the banking,
But
the public sector banks.
Yes, and they will do it. See, the whole issue is, as the growth takes place in the next 2-3 years, you will have the reversal of all these things. This is not the first time it's happening.
Oh, you're saying
It happened.
so you're hopeful
Yes,
and
yes.
optimistic that there will be a
Yes,
reversal of
yes.
this, and
Definitely.
what do you Mohan, you agree with him that
I don't agree with this at all. That you can borrow money forever and not repay and not give your.
No, he's saying that there may be a reversal in this whole situation scenario in the next 2-3 years. We need not be.
If you track it for the last 10 years,
Yes.
you've seen only corporate debt increasing.
Yes.
And inability to service the debt.
But the
Many
GDP
of these
also
companies,
growing.
have gone through continuous restructuring.
Right.
Okay. This has become a joke now.
But
The thing is that when you restructure, sometimes you dispose of assets. Okay, you sell off, like Nokia is now restructuring.
Right.
After being the number one cell phone company in the world, it has sold its factory in Chennai. It sold some factory in China to somebody else. Doesn't mean there's an economic gap there, because the Nokia factory will keep producing
Right.
cell phones for somebody else.
Right.
Okay, that unit is there as a viable living unit in the economy. So we'll have to look at all these companies in that way, saying that if two divisions go,
How does it matter?
doesn't matter.
But
Somebody else will run it.
the Indian corporate mindset is that we will not let go anything.
We will not let go anything. You keep lending me
You
more
keep
money,
lending me money.
and I keep buying more houses in
Mr.
London.
Vasudev, would you agree with that at least? Would you agree with that mindset of
I
Indian
would
corporate?
certainly not buy this argument that all the corporate sector is trying to do is to swindle money from the banking sector and divert money. I
You
wouldn't
don't
buy
agree
that
with that?
at all.
Okay,
And
fair
the
enough.
global standard 4% NPA is not high. Take it from me. China is 20% plus NPA. Nobody is saying that people are, and who are the borrowers? Borrowers
Nobody-
are public
they-
sector entities.
Probably they can't even discuss it there.
Just one minute.
1 second.
So the 4% NPA by global standards is not high at all. Even by Indian standards, in 90s or so, we had NPAs running to 20-25%. And also, I think you have also tried to analyze and see and find out what sectors these NPAs are accounting for.
Right.
Most of them are in the infrastructure sector, whether it is power
35%
or
of the
road.
borrowings, 35% of the loans are going to the infrastructure
That's what I'm
sector.
saying. And everybody knows that infrastructure in sector in our economy is not doing well for various reasons, whether it is policy reasons, whether it is other reasons, whether there are some judicial cases or whatever else may be. But the problem is in the infrastructure sector, and I think my colleague is quite right in saying that a normal bank, a private sector bank, is very reluctant to put its money in such type of long gestation
So the
projects.
public sector
It is
banks
public
have
sector
become the
banks
scapegoats.
who are willy-nilly having to do it.
Okay, sir. Yes, running out of very quickly. Mohan.
80% of the banking in India is government public sector. So private sector is very small.
70 now,
Yeah,
70.
76 or something. So.
70.
And 4%, 5% NPA is not good. By international standards, 1.6. You're looking at the ceiling. You can't say that China is my benchmark.
I'm
We
saying by
can't compare
global
ourselves with
standards
China.
of developing economies.
No,
Global standards of developing economies.
If you're going to be judged by international banking standards, you use that standard.
Okay, yes, Praveen, very
the
quickly.
Chinese economists actually are very worried these days now. If you look at the discourse in China, there is a serious issue here. Now, the point is that in our case, my sense is, can we send some good messages that nobody is saying that corporate sector is hell-bent on swindling money.
Right.
Nobody is making that point. However, the fact remains that the seriousness which needs to be displayed by the corporate sector is certainly not there.
Okay, I think on that note, we are completely run out of time. On that note, we need to end. It has been a very fascinating debate. This is something which doesn't happen in the Indian media too often about how the corporates are behaving. The fact is that the corporates also face problems, but their mindsets also maybe needs to be changed, and the way the government deals with them also, maybe there needs to be a relook. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. C.M. Vasudev, Mohan Guruswamy, Praveen and Jyotirmoy Jain. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture same time tomorrow.